Ayuk Netana Gamakwain and Dejinikas, Magazine and Dodim, Nagajiwanong Nindonjaba, Made Quain Dao, Niminwenda Moma. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to see so many people gathering for this really good talk this afternoon. My English name is Liz Jokla, and I am a faculty member here at Fond du Lac. I also am the director of the Ojibwe Moaning Resource Center, which is underneath the library that direction. We are, like I said, bringing this here with St. Scholastica, and Jennifer Nemi is standing here with me. She's going to talk a little bit about the program there. And I wanted to say a little bit about Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College. We are the only college in the state, in the United States, that is a partnership between a tribe and a state educational institution. As such, we have a unique mission to serve American Indian students in the state of Minnesota, legislated through the state. And we do that readily and happily, and things on campus unfold in unique and interesting ways in order to achieve that mission. And so we're happy to be able to bring Tara here today for this talk. A little bit about, I sent Jackson around with a smudge, just to smudge the perimeter. If anyone is wanting to have more thorough smudging, catch me outside. I wanted to make sure and acknowledge some people in the audience. Where I saw Edie. Where'd Edie go? Edie is with ISD 709, Duluth Schools. Thanks for coming, Edie. And I need to acknowledge my mom, Bunny Jokla is here. I need to acknowledge Steve Briggs is here. And we're happy to see familiar faces coming to campus and continuing to bring our community closer together in this way to talk about important things. So with that, I'm going to wrap up my welcome and let Jennifer talk a little bit about the program at St. Scholastica.
Okay. Buju, Jennifer Nemi, and Dijnakas, Jaganashimung. I'm excited to be back here. So I was actually worked here at the college back in the early 2000s with Giniw Collective, the teacher training program. So it always feels a little bit like coming back home when we get to visit. So I'm the director of the Native Studies Center at Scholastica. Our center is just over a year old, so pretty new. We do have a really strong partnership already with CSS and Fond du Lac with Bunny and Cynthia, so if you want to wave, that have the extended social work program here. So excited that we were able to bring 33 students, staff, and faculty to come and visit the beautiful campus and share in this event with you. So miigwech.
It's an honor to have Tara here. I in my notes said all of the various things that I'm supposed to say about the things that she has done, but I'm going to have to wing it. The work that Tara does in Indian country is phenomenal. She travels around the country raising awareness of issues that face indigenous communities and human rights and civil rights issues. She is an attorney. Her work for environmental issues and environmental rights is ongoing and has been rather significant, especially in the last decade. If you don't know who Tara is, you are in for a very big treat. She's very eloquent, much better speaker than me. You'll be happy to that she'll be able to follow straight lines and talking about things and not circles like Liz. And I know of her work internationally as well for environmental issues, because in indigenous communities around the globe, we're all facing similar challenges. Sovereignty, standing up for the rights of our peoples, standing up for the rights of our environment, water, and the animals, we're all facing these similar issues. And the majority populations are turning to indigenous communities, asking that we share our collective knowledge, our traditional indigenous knowledge, as we face challenges as humans. The climate change as we see it impacts everyone equally regarding their ethnicity or economic status. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over the microphone to Tara, who can speak on these things. And if we could give her a warm welcome, that would be great.
Thank you.
And a few gifts.
Oh, thank you so much.
And the microphone.
Thank you. Buju Giniw, Minua and Didnwe Maganaduk, Shabawe Kwe Indigenakaz, McGuinn Dudem, Kuching and Dunjaba. My name is Tara. I'm Bear Clan from Kuching First Nation. Super glad to be here with all of you. Thank you for all coming. I see there's a bunch of people still standing in the back. You should come and sit in the front. No one ever sits in the front. Thank you for sitting in the front. So I feel like when I'm in front of a bunch of Native people that it's kind of weird to talk at you. So I'm actually going to hopefully hear questions from you. The bulk of this will actually hopefully be you guys asking me questions and we can have a conversation instead. Thank you for this, Asema. I really appreciate it. And for asking me to be here in Fond du Lac and share this space with you. So it's actually interesting. This little rotunda is the first place I ever went to a powwow. I was like 14 and I came here for Upward Bound and went to my first powwow. Didn't know what I was doing. My memory of that is actually a little boy coming up to me and asking me to dance, and I was like, I don't know how to dance. I don't know how to dance. And then his older brother came and just grabbed my hand, and so I was dancing, and the little boy came up to me and he goes, I thought you said you didn't know how to dance. And I was like, oh, sorry, dude, sorry. So it's good to be back. This is a really beautiful place, beautiful territory with this lovely, lovely red pines around us. Well, normally I would give a presentation about, the environment and the work I'm doing for the protection of Mother Earth. But since it's kind of more like tell her story was the prompt, right? Tell her story. I'll just talk about that. So first I have to recognize the Briggs family who's here in the audience. They're from my hometown. So I am from International Falls, Minnesota. So I was born and I was raised in Rainier. Has anyone been to Rainier? Anyone? Yeah. Rainier's awesome. It's got like 2 roads. It's great. It's got a whole bunch of res dogs, even though it's not really a res, but it has a bunch of dogs. So I grew up with a family that was my stepfather and my mother. My mother is, unfortunately, she's been very disconnected from her community. She's actually from Turtle Mountain. That's where my grandmother is enrolled. And my stepfather is like the blondest guy you've ever seen. Completely Norwegian Finn, that guy. So I grew up pretty disconnected, to be honest. I didn't really know a lot. I had my brown cousins, and we were the brown kids in school, but that was pretty much it. So coming here when I was 14, that was the first ever powwow, right? Like that kind of situation. And then I went to college. Had some pretty tough adjustments in college. I went to the University of Minnesota, and first day on the sidewalk was seeing more people than I saw in my entire high school. First class was sitting with more people than I'd ever been in the entire school. 350 students in one room. It's pretty overwhelming, right? And found my way to the American Indian Studies Department. So it's so good to see this, this beautiful, beautiful coming together of Indigenous people. And so I found my way to that, and that was hard too because it was, a mixture of kids. So it's the kids that come from the res that, are very strong in their culture, strong in their understanding. And then there's the urban kids, and then there's like the kids that are in between, right? So like the border town kids that don't really know and aren't really connected. And so we're all trying to like fumble our way towards who's right, and who knows the most. And I found my way to Dennis Jones. Pei Bombinese. Does anyone know Dennis in the room? Yeah. All right. Love that guy. And so I was at the point where I was like, I'm gonna drop out. Like I'm not doing so great. I'm having a really hard time. It's a really, really hard time, and I had some really hard things happen too at the same time. And it was the language, and it was going to ceremony. It was going to sweat. It was going to camp up north. It was going back to my community, and these beautiful connections and learning a different way of being and a different way of thinking that helped me through it. It really got me to where I wanted to be. I changed majors like 6 times. I don't know if everyone in the room has all of their majors figured out and exactly what they're going to do in their lives, but that was not me at all. I thought I wanted to be a doctor and like it was pre-med, but everything else was like, I'm just going to take this class because it seems cool. So I'm going to take karate, I'm going to take biology, I'm going to take English, I'm going to take all these different classes at the same time and just like, you know, I remember I had to go in because they were like, you have to declare a major. And I met with my, like the guy who helps you through like the counselor, right? And he looks at all my stuff and he's like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know, I'm just taking stuff that I like to do. And he was like, you have probably about 5 majors going here. You need to pick one. And I was like, could I pick like 3? And so I did end up picking 3. Completely unrelated, biology, American Indian Studies, and art history. I wanted to do studio art, but they wouldn't let me major in studio art at the same time I was majoring in science. So did all that, thought I was gonna go to med school, got to that point, and all my friends were going to med school. I didn't wanna, I was like, no, I should take a year and like do something else, you know, and get a job or whatever. Did that, worked in the administrative side of medicine, learned about insurance, and I was like, I am not doing that. There's no way. Like, there's no way I'm gonna do that. That's horrible. How do you treat patients based on their insurance? That's so unfair, you know? And so I went down that road, and I'm like, what am I gonna do? I don't know what to do, you know? I really don't know what to do. And my partner at the time, he goes, well, have you thought about law school? And I was like, no. You could go to law school. And so I literally just got LSATs for dummies, took the LSATs, then I applied to all the schools that sent me free applications because I had no money, and ended up going to law school. And I was like the kid in the class who had never seen Law and Order, not once, ever. And like they're like, what do lawyers do? And I'm like, I have no idea, but I'm here. You know, I have no idea what lawyers do. And you know, I really, I had a hard time in law school. Law school is full of a lot of tough situations of people that are coming from generational wealth, of people that have no understanding. Encountered a lot of situations where you realize that the knowledge of Native people is so lacking in the law. The law is meant to dispossess. The law is meant to oppress a lot of our people, and it takes more than it gives. You know, you learn about, I took federal Indian law, and you learn about these situations where the professor is explaining, well, you know, jurisdictionally, if a woman is raped on the reservation by a non-Native person, depending on the jurisdiction, that person may end up actually not being prosecuted for what happened. And I remember distinctly one of my classmates saying, how does that happen in the United States? This is the United States of America, that doesn't happen. And the professor said, no, this does happen because this is Indian country, it's different. You know, and seeing that kind of realization happen over and over and over again as I learned about Indian people in the law, and my classmates learning about Indian people in the law, that was really shocking. And I ended up doing the ICWA Law Clinic, so Indian Child Welfare, and worked with Indian families. I thought I was actually going to be a patent lawyer, you know, because I had this hard science background. I was like, well, I should probably do this. It's science and the law mixed together. Then I worked in ICWA and saw what was happening to Indian people still today. Indian people being dispossessed, Indian people being taken from their families, Indian people being removed from their cultures. You know, this forced assimilation and theft of our bodies. You know, at that point, it's actually your bodies, right? You're talking about your children. And so that was so shocking to me that I ended up doing that. You know, I was like, I have to change what I'm doing. I'm going to go to Arizona State University. They have a really great Indian law program. I'm going to learn about how do I help my people, you know, because our people need a lot of help. Our people need representation. Our people need to have Native lawyers that are there with them as they go through this process, because the process is not built by us. The process is not built for us. It's a whole other system and a whole other way of thinking. And ended up doing that. And then I went to DC. Was in Washington, DC, and working at first I worked for the White House. I worked for underneath the Obama administration for an internship. Please apply to internships. Every student in the room. I did not have the greatest grades in the world. I didn't think that I would get the internship that I got, and I applied through the UDOL program. Please write that down, UDOL program. and ended up working in the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and had this amazing experience, you know, to see what was really happening and to have influence at a high level, to represent at a high level. My first meeting when I was in the White House Council was, they grabbed me. They're like, hey, can you come to this meeting? And I was like, sure. And it was with the chair of like the whole department, which was pretty, like, most people never get to, the interns never get to meet the chair. That's like very rare, right? And so I go and I'm sitting in this meeting and they're all talking about Indigenous people, and they're specifically talking about something called the Hearth Act. So the Hearth Act is this long-term leasing act that basically, the situation is right now as it stands, when it comes to leases in Indian country, there's a federal approval process and there's a whole environmental review process, National Environmental Policy Act, that kicks in because it's technically federal land, right? And so that's super oppressive when it comes to getting business leases, when it comes to getting housing leases. You're having to get everything approved through the federal government, so the wait time is like 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, right? Just to build in Indian country, to build in our own territory, you have to get permission to do it. And so the Hearth Act is basically a reclamation of that right within Indian people. So the Indian people the tribe gets to hold that instead of the feds. And our department, back to the chair, our department was totally opposed to it. So they were about to make the decision to say, no, we're not gonna do this. And I'm listening to them all talk about this, like, no, Native people can't handle this, like they can't possibly manage their own affairs, we need to have review over this, if we give this to them, then they're gonna start taking other things, like we can't do this, right? Like that was the department's position. And I'm listening to all this happen, there's a room of 10 people, and I'm, wow, this is really, really offensive, you know, this is so offensive, you guys really think that about Native people? And the chair goes, well, I don't know, kind of seems like maybe there might be some sovereignty issues. Seems like there might be another position that we maybe haven't heard, and maybe you could do that and research that for me and get back to me in like a week. And I was like, yes, I will do that. And so then I had to go through this whole process of teaching them the basics of federal Indian law. This is jurisdictional issues, this is what ordinances mean, this is like what sovereignty means, all those basics, right? And went back and forth with the person that was totally opposed to this, that had been advocating against the Hearth Act for a year. She'd been advocating for a year at that point. And then it went higher, and then it went higher, and then we went back to the chair, and the chair was like, I'm adopting her position, we're gonna pass the Hearth Act. And the Hearth Act was signed into law by President Obama a few weeks later. It was amazing, right? And that's what representation is. Like, that's, being in that room was so powerful, just by being in that room, right? And I never expected to be there. I never expected to have that kind of, you know, moment where I could say, hey, excuse me, there's like some sovereignty issues here. And that turned into working in private practice, working for tribes all over the country on various issues, mostly gaming. When you're a tribal lawyer, you end up doing a lot of gaming if you're working for a big firm. Wasn't really liking that so much. It was actually, to me, I was like, that's not really what got my heart into this area of law, right? Like what got me into this area of law was wanting to really, you know, represent the issues that I think are hurting our people so deeply. And obviously economics are one of those issues, but that's not what drove me. That wasn't my passion. I was more aimed towards culture and, you know, revitalization of who we actually are as Native people within this giant system that we're in. And so when I had been in CEQ, I had been working on, you know, all these different issues, but Keystone XL pipeline was one of the issues. And there was all of these Native people from South Dakota, from North Dakota, the Lakotas, Dakotas, Nakotas, that were opposed to this project. And then flash forward a few years, and that same pipeline project is still sitting in front of them, right? It's still in front of the people reviewing. And so what ended up happening is I'm working in my law firm full-time, you know, first-year associate, so that means like 80-hour weeks, 70-hour weeks, living in DC, super hard place to live, nothing like this. You know, I don't even know if they really know what this kind of place is. It's a place they saw in a movie or something like that, right? And so, you know, I'm in that situation, and I'm like, I'm going to start going to these demonstrations that are in front of the White House weekly. I'm going to start going there, see what it's about, listening to the messages, listening to the stories of the people. And then I started to see like how that particular method of advocacy actually had huge impacts, and it had huge implications. You know, it was people that were standing in front of something and standing together and elevating this message that eventually reached most of the country. Most people know what Keystone XL pipeline is because of that, you know, direct action, that direct resistance. Seeing Native people come into Washington, D.C., marching with horses, with teepees, with all those things. Seeing teepees on the National Mall is incredibly powerful. And it's a reminder that we're still here, that we are still standing strong, and we're still standing up for our land and for ourselves, you know, for our right to exist. And I ended up doing like all these protests, and then it started to be like I was doing them at my lunchtime, and then I was like writing these articles and like pitching them to different reporters. Go onto Twitter. If you ever want to write anything for anybody, go into Twitter, find the reporter and be like, I have an idea. That's literally how I did that. I had no idea. It's not like I started out and I was like, I'm gonna be writing all these articles for different publications, and I'm gonna, you know, get an article in the New York Times, and I'm gonna do all these things. That is not how it started. I literally was just like, somebody needs to cover this story. Like, you know, this is happening. Somebody needs to cover it. And then these guys like reached out and were like, can you write a story? And yes, I can write you a story. And then I started organizing protests. And then I started going to the like demonstrations, and I started doing all these different things. And I finally kind of got to this point where like the law firm was like, what are you doing? You know, and I was like, I don't know. I'm not really feeling that so much, you know? And I was at another point in my life where I'm like, what am I gonna do? You know, what really drives me, you know? And around the same time, I had run into Winona LaDuke, and she was like, you should come work for me. And I was like, I don't even know you. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna go just like leave DC and come work for some random person. Like, you know what I mean? That's kind of like what I thought. And then she just kept pursuing. She's like, no, you really need to come and work for me. I'm like, no, I'm really not gonna do that though. And then like, you know, I had my cousin reach out to me at one point who was here, and she was like, yeah, so I ran into Winona at a protest. She said you need to come and work for her. And I was like, are you seriously? Like, are you getting me through my family right now? Is that what's happening? And then I was like, I called her up finally, and I'm like, okay, well, tell me about it. What's it like to come and work for you? What am I gonna do? And then around the same time, I had run into this piece of legislation called the Keeping in the Ground Act, and I met Bernie Sanders, and I met all these like, you know, high-level political people, and did this, you know, little thing where you introduce a bill or whatever in Capitol Hill, which was pretty crazy, but it was like, all right, whatever. Met Bernie Sanders, really short, little angry man, you know, and I was like, hey, Bernie, how's it going? Actually, what was funny though is like right around that same time, I had been helping these folks out at Oak Flat, who are fighting this copper mine called Rio Tinto that's like threatening to, basically what they want to do is remove all the copper from their sacred site, and then it collapses. And so I was helping them to get connected in DC, like to get those meetings with those congressional people, to get those, you know, pieces of legislation, at least in the motion of passing. And so Bernie had just met with them that day. And then he's coming across the hill, you know, and he's like all doing his thing or whatever. And then he sees me and he's like all confused. And I was like, we're everywhere. We're all over. We're everywhere in DC. And he was just like, oh, you know, like yes, Indian people are literally everywhere. But yeah, so after that, you know, I met this woman who was his staffer, and she was like, you know, she looks at her friend next to her and she goes, I need you to move. And they're like, what? And she's like, no, I need you to move. And then she looks at me and she's like, come here. And I was like, okay. She's like, we're gonna be friends and we're gonna talk because I need your help. And I was like, okay. And ended up helping her with a bunch of different federal Indian policy because he was running for president at that time, right? And he was starting to kind of get in tune with the fact that there's like a whole group of people that he'd left out, whole group of people that you need to understand, which is like the sovereignty and federal Indian nations that are all over Turtle Island. And so that relationship just kept going. And then she was like, do you want to come and work, you know, on this campaign? And I was like, oh, okay, I could do that. And so I'm like, get this job with Winona, and then I get like Bernie Sanders at the same time, and then he ends up losing, which there's a whole other thing about that, but you know. And then Trump became president. But at the same time, there was also this gathering and growing in Standing Rock, the Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota, in a place called Cannibal that I'd never heard of. And these teenage runners came all the way to Washington, D.C. And so I was still out in D.C. at that point and saw these runners arrive. And when that happened, and I saw that, and then I saw this call go out from this woman named LaDonna Allard, who's now one of my aunties and a dear, dear friend and mentor, I was like, I need to go. You know, our people are standing. They're standing up, and they're saying no. And they're really saying no in a way that's like, I'm going to not move. I'm going to say no to you. And so I went. I just like packed my stuff and put everything in my car, and actually I had to rent a car because I didn't have a car in DC. But packed up my Greyhound, who does not belong in North Dakota at all. And went out to this place that was still like at that point just a field. You know, it's a field and a few tents. And ended up staying for 6 months. And at the same time, Winona was like, I thought you were gonna come and work for me. And I'm like, oh yeah, I will, I swear. Like, I'm gonna do this thing really quick. But yeah, so that's where I got to that point. And, you know, I think there's always this question of how do we serve our people, right? What's the best path to serve our people? To me, the reason that I feel like I've kind of moved into environmental advocacy specifically is because the way that I've understood things and the way that I've been taught is that we are the earth and the earth is us. And there's nothing that is more powerful than protecting our mother. Everything comes from that. Our lives come from that. Our bodies come from that. Our food comes from that. Our water comes from that. Our children, our generations come from that place. I know, so that, to me, that was the way that I felt like I could give back. As I was kind of finding my path through Indian child welfare, through, you know, gaming, through trying to advocate for hospitals and healthcare and all these different pieces, it was ultimately bringing it back to that center of the earth. But that doesn't mean there's lots of other ways to advocate and ways to be representative and help your own people. You know, some of us are really gifted teachers. We're really gifted speakers or healers, or, you know, we're gifted artists. We give what we have, right? It's about community. It's about recognizing that each of our skills and all the things that we hold in us actually belongs to the whole, it belongs to everybody else. That we only have this one lifetime. Each of us in this room, we all have this one lifetime. We happen to be living together in this moment, right? We're on the same plane of existence right now, in this moment. But we have this one lifetime, right? We have this one path. And with what I've understood so far in my 35 years on this earth, 35 years old, is that it's okay not to know that path. It's okay to not feel like you have it all figured out. It's okay to kind of fall off sometimes and like wind your way back to it, because the path is inside of you, right? And it's something that's a part of you. And so, you know, for all of us that are sitting here in this time, in this place, as your students, as your teachers, as your all these different people, you know, there's all these different paths inside each one of us. And there's a way forward. We just have to keep moving. You know, I got asked like 2 weeks ago, what have you learned up to this point? And what I've learned is you just keep moving forward. You know, even if you don't know, or you've fallen, or you've, you know, lost your job, or you've lost a family member, or you've had, you know, this huge loss. So, you know, in my case, like the code access pipeline went underneath the river, right? We lost. Like, that's the truth. We lost. We won in a lot of ways. Indigenous people reached a global narrative, you know, it reached a global audience. They knew that we were here. But but it still hurt, it hurt to lose. But it's okay to lose and to keep moving forward. It's okay to not know what's going to come next. To be standing here in front of you is, when I was growing up, I barely spoke. I was really shy. I was really quiet. I turned red when people talked to me. I looked at my feet a lot. I was very small. It wasn't ever anything that I planned. It was looking at what was happening around me and trying to figure out, how do I do this? Or if I didn't know how to figure it out, I would just do it, and just keep moving forward. I usually show a presentation to folks. I can at least show this for a little bit. There's some good pictures of this. That's line 3. Okay, so this is the one side of my life that I show people. So up on the left there, that's a group of women and I from different indigenous nations who are sitting in banking institutions. So we've, as a method of trying to protect the earth from extractive industry and try to move the narrative away from taking, from constant taking and consumption. To me, there's no better way or more effective way that I've encountered than, aside from standing in front of the machines, is to target their money. They care about that. And so that's a group of us in a banking institution. That's meeting Obama, who I yelled at actually right before that picture was taken, which is kind of funny, That's why I'm kind of smiling all weird. But, to me, I see these two different worlds. We hear about walking in two worlds a lot, right? That phrase of walking in two worlds. To me, it's more, the way that I heard it put by Jim Northrup, which was really, really beautiful and simple and powerful, is there's this square world and then there's this circular world, right? The circular world is the teachings that we hold inside of us. The circular world is the truths that we know as human beings and the truths that we are told as Anishinaabe people about our place of balance and life in the world. And so it's kind of like you're trying to walk into two, right? And in my case, I actually try really hard to be this bridge between the two and bring those values into those spaces, but it's very difficult at times. And then this is the other work I do here in Minnesota. I guess if before I move to questions, if I were to leave you with anything, it's to bring it back to that place of just moving forward and continuing on and not feeling like you have to meet some measure of success that somebody else sets for you, right? I feel like the Westernized way of thinking is there's all these markers of success, you have to have this job and you have to have this house and you have to have these things, and now we've got the advent of social media, so you got to have this many likes, you got to have this many shares, you got to have this many friends. That's not, all of that is created by human beings, right? The success that we have is, to me, it's the relationships that you carry and the relationships that you build and the relationships that you hold with other people and the knowledge that you acquire during your lifetime. You have this one lifetime to learn, right? We have this one lifetime to learn as much as we possibly can about the world and about ourselves. And so to remember that nobody else defines your success but you. Nobody else can tell you what the best thing is or what, you have to be. You have that within yourself, and the more you spend time with learning the knowledge that has been passed down for thousands of years, the more you're going to learn about yourself. And that's what I've found. The more that you are going to learn and be able to move forward and to understand yourself and feel fulfilled. If I've learned anything, it's that the square world and those markers of success do not fulfill you. Things do not fulfill you. Stuff does not fulfill you. I'm most fulfilled when I'm sitting on Rainy Lake and, I'm out fishing in the boat with my parents, or I'm out fasting on an island, and thinking about all the bodies that those rocks have held before mine, and feeling how small I am in the world. That's when I feel the most fulfilled, and I'm like, okay, I've come back to myself. I never really know how to dance, so I'll just say, like, you can do this, and you can get there. Just keep moving forward. So, I'm gonna ask for questions now.
And while we're waiting for the first question, as you're raising your hand, I have a question. Why were you yelling at Obama?
So I had just said, he was all excited to see, there was a whole line of us, and I was first in line to meet the president that I worked for. And I was like, I had a really good time working for your office. And he was like, oh, that's so wonderful. I hope you had a great experience. And I was like, and I really want to know what your plan is when it comes to your foundation, because he had just finished his presidency. I really want to know what your plan is when it comes to your foundation and Indigenous rights, because as I understood it, I was getting tear gassed and maced and arrested and put into dog kennels in North Dakota as your administration did absolutely nothing. And then the camera guy was like, say cheese. And like, that was the moment, and he's just like, that's what happened.
We have a question back here.
Buju, I was just wondering about your work with Line 3. How can people who are on the fence about it and don't know much about it, how can they learn more about it?
Yeah, I will say that as a person who's from this region, from northern Minnesota, I understand that there is this question of economy and the question of jobs, right? We are in a remote place. This is still pretty remote when you think about Minneapolis or something like that, right? And so there's this constant kind of like battle of, this is the job that's available, this is the job that pays, this is the job that, But the way that I see things is we can do all of that, or we can pass on something to our children that's more powerful than ourselves. And we can stand up for something that's more powerful than ourselves, which is the earth. The earth is more powerful than any person sitting in this room. The earth can put us out like nothing, right? And so Line 3 to me is not only a violation of the earth, it is a representation of what extraction leads to. The climate is changing around us. We all know that's happening. If you're from a place like this, you surely know it's happening. You see the pests that are getting into the trees. You see the animals that are changing, that are moving, that are leaving. Minnesota itself, like what's now Minnesota, has been logged out. It's been cleared. There's been new trees planted. It's a whole ecosystem shift. And so Line 3 is a continuation of that extraction, of that short-sighted human need, which isn't really a need. It's just something that we are convinced is a need. If you want to learn more about the struggle, please visit stopline3.org. Visit Gitchagumi Scouts. Visit Giniw. There's all kinds of places you can learn about why. Because it's not just, I think there's this narrative that's been pushed of protesters, of people that disrupt the status quo, of people that are confused, that are driving their cars to the protests and doing all those things, right? That's like the constant narrative that we hear. What I see are people that are trying to reclaim a different way of living and a different way of being. And we have to start somewhere. You can't start with being an absolutist, I'm not gonna, there's some of the things I'm wearing right now have fossil fuels in them, right? Like the soles of my shoes for sure do. But we do have to start somewhere. And that means, I hope for a lot of people in the room, going to ceremony, learning those teachings, learning that wisdom, but also taking that next step of doing something with the life that you have that is more than yourself. That is not the way that they've taught. The way that colonial systems have taught is literally killing people all over the world. Climate change is killing people all over the world. We know that. Australia doesn't just catch on fire for no reason, that's happening. And we have to reconcile with that as people. we have to reconcile with that and think about, what is my role and what am I doing to change that? I think that we can change that. I hope that we can. And if we can't, we're going to get wiped out again like we have been before. Anishinaabe people have been through this before, right? We've been wiped out a few times. So, stopline3.org, please.
I have a question over here.
Hello, miigwech for being here. So what one piece of advice would you give our young people? The oppression of Native people is deep and wide, and it can feel overwhelming at times. So what one piece of advice would you give young people to really, whether it's activism, education, whatever it may be, to keep moving forward?
In all these places that I've visited around the world, and all these different indigenous people I've met, and all these different, political governments that I've met, and amazing people doing all this amazing work all over the place. I never thought I'd be like out in New Zealand or, in Belgium, like talking to their parliament or whatever. That's crazy. You know what I mean? That's actually crazy. Like, I'm sitting there in my world like, this is kind of crazy. This is kind of crazy. But they're still all people. They might speak a different language, but they're all people, right? Nobody's actually really better than anybody else. We're all just people. We're all just pitiful human beings. And so the one thing I've learned as I've been in all these spaces and places is there's this deep kind of, I don't even know if it's attraction, but it's this kind of want that you meet from people when they meet a Native person for the first time, or when they meet a Native person and interact with you. They want something from you. It might be absolution, it might be your culture, or like, I'm gonna feel deeper and better about myself just by being in your presence. I'm gonna be really spiritual, or you know what I mean? There's all kinds of like this whole range of things, and you can like talk really deep with them, and then they're like, wow, really? And you're like, yes, and they're like, what? But I've seen that want. And so I would say to every person in this room that is a Native person or an ally, that you have something inside of you that is so desired and so sought after because it's the truth. This deep, deep wisdom that's been passed on for thousands of years. And that you have that inside of yourself. And no one can take that away from you. You have it inherently. It's up to you to figure out, if you're gonna develop and add on to that. But you always carry that inside of yourself. So, feel all those ancestors behind you. Whenever I step into strange places, I always try to feel that chain behind me, right? Because we're all just like these links in this big long chain. And I always think about all these people that had to live and die for me to be here. And all those people had to live and die for you to be here. And sometimes I can feel like a lot of pressure, but it should also feel like a lot of empowerment that you are here and you are existing in this space. And so, I guess feel the power of yourself. Feel the power of you existing and being here, and the fact that your spirit wanted so badly to be here that you live today. It can be really hard sometimes. It really, really can, That oppression and that ignorance and that outside world can be really tough at times. But you are powerful. Each of you is powerful.
I'm an alumni from here, and I'm a current student at UWS, and I'm a legal studies student, First Nations minor. And my question for you is, with all your advocacy within, the pipelines, and you having your lawyer degree, is there anything that you're doing specifically for like awareness or pushing for legislation with the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women? I am doing extensive research with my university on the epidemic, and next month I'm going to research in Rotunda and bringing my research and pushing Savannah's Act on legislators in Wisconsin at the state capitol. So I'm just wondering, like, what have you done, or any recommendations for me on how I can make my voice louder for that?
Yeah, With that specific issue, to me, that's one of the most sensitive issues that is out there right now at this moment, right? There's all these different movements that are happening at the same time, but that particular one is such a sensitive, tough issue. You know, I myself have gone through some very, very hard things related to that, but I think it's critical that we center families that have experienced that loss, you know, that we elevate those particular voices. And so I myself I consider myself more on the periphery, right? Because I'm not going to take up space in something that I feel like it's meant for families. It's meant for those people to be the voices. I'll help, you know, I'll come in if they want me to come and talk or stand with them or whatever they want me to do. If they want me to paint a sign, I don't know, whatever it is, I'll do that, but it's not something that I particularly feel like I should take up space in. I do talk about it in relationship to extractive industry and what that does to remote communities. You know, there has to be workers that build things, and there's typically an influx of outside people. And then there's all those jurisdictional issues of what happens when women or anybody is physically harmed in Indian country. So I do talk about that. There is, absolutely. I mean, in some of the work that I did in DC when I was still practicing as a big firm lawyer, you know, I got these pro bono hours, and I used all of them, like almost immediately, you know. But you know, some of that was hosting and bringing people from Fort Berthold and from these places that have had just explosions of violence in their communities, bringing them to the Department of Justice, bringing them to pieces of legislation that they are trying to, you know, whether it's through VAWA or through these different legislative mechanisms to get through jurisdictional fixes so we can at least protect our own people in the same way that everyone else is protected in this country. I think that there are ways to do that. I know here in Minnesota there's been a task force created for that. I would say definitely get involved with that. Or, you know, if you're doing research, do the research and then just, here you go. You know what I mean? Like, this is my contribution to you. I'm sure there are other organizations and networks that you can get connected with. I know that there's going to be a Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women gathering in Cloquet, here in Cloquet, on the 24th of this month. What time is it at? 11? And we're going to meet at the mall parking lot? Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, honestly, just showing up and trying to figure out who is working on those issues is really important. That way you're not operating by yourself, and you actually can build a community that is also working on that same issue, and you can build those networks and get connected in, you know. That'll help your work, and it'll also help everybody else that's working on that same issue. So, yeah, there's definitely ways to get involved.
So you talked a little bit about being, one of the only few brown people in your law school, was it? How did you find that drive, and did you ever feel lonely or just, you know, separated from the whole group, and what drove you to really finish that?
Yeah, I definitely felt super lonely in law school. I went to University of Minnesota Law School. I actually transferred in from St. Thomas. I started out at St. Thomas because I thought I was going to go to New York for law school, and then I ended up not going because it was so expensive. And anyway, yeah, you know, I remember. Okay, so here's an example of how ignorant and also how isolating law school particularly can be. So I'm in like your first year classes. You're in like these giant halls of people. Like everyone takes this. Like we all take the same core subjects. And so there's this case that we're reading. It's from the 70s. And the case was an assault case. And in the case, the judge it was between a native and a non-native. And the judge had written, you know, he ended up finding for the non-native and said, I wouldn't want to mess with an Indian on the warpath either, right? Like that's like super racist language. And so the professor is, why do you think the judge referenced the race of the person in this case? And one of my classmates raises his hand and he goes, well, isn't this because, you know, they were in a bar and Native people, can't handle alcohol the same way that we all do, and they have different mentalities, and they have different mens rea. Isn't that the truth? And like, we're talking 300 kids, all their heads like pointed to me because I'm the only native law student in that room, just like, like it was, and I'm like, no, it's because in a really racist way, the judge was pointing out there's jurisdictional issues that are at play because it's a native and non-native, and they're sitting on an Indian reservation, and I'm like looking at the guy or whatever. What I found out was, what I ended up doing was, there is usually little groups of people, the Native American Law Students Association. I was part of that with the other 3 Native law students in the whole school. And then I actually also went back to University of Minnesota. I crossed the bridge a lot, and I was helping out with the Ojibwe language dictionary that's online. And so just sitting with Paybom and spending time and like getting that reinforcement. I think there are ways to keep community going, and to me, whether it's in law school or whether it's in DC, which was also really isolating, we find each other, right? You always find Indian people. Like, you always can find them no matter where you're at. Like, you're on like the metro together and you're like, and then they give you that look and they're like, like that's like how it goes, But it's always finding that community, and then also making the effort to go back home and remind yourself of who you're with and where you're from, and that you have this whole people behind you, that you might be in a situation that's really uncomfortable, but it's okay to be uncomfortable, because you're strong and you can build up this kind of like, I don't know, spiritual armor is a way to think about it. That's kind of how I think about it. You get like your armor recharged up, and you go back in those spaces, and then you're raising your hand and telling some racist guy what he just said was really racist.
Tara, the St. Scholastica people have to hit the road. Everyone else is welcome to stay. And anyone else, just raise your hand if you have a question. My question is that when we were talking about what you're doing, you said, I don't want to be called an activist, I want to be an advocate. What's the difference?
Yeah, so I think the way that we use our words is, especially when it comes to the English language, the English language is really slippery, right? It can be really twisty. I actually think it's, especially as I went to law school and learned about, we really analyze like what each word means and how it can have 5 different meanings. It's a language of, it lacks truth, for sure. It lacks this like fundamental core truth. And I'm gonna give them a second. So when I moved out to DC, one of the first issues that I actually ended up working on that I didn't know I was gonna work on was the Washington Redskins. There's like, I'd never seen anything like that before. Minnesota doesn't have that kind of situation, And so I'm sitting in Subway like my first week of working as an associate, and there's a guy in a Redskins jersey in front of me, and there's a Redskins hat behind me, and all the Subway employees are wearing Redskins memorabilia because they're holding a Redskins deal, and I was like, holy, what? Are you serious? I was just up on the Hill today advocating for Native people to get a hospital. You know what I mean? And dealing with all the ignorance that comes behind that, all the senators that have these awful opinions of us, all the congresspersons that have these awful opinions of us, that think that we are like these savage, uncivilized people that can't handle our own stuff. And then I'm walking around and seeing this, right? Like, that's so offensive. And so randomly, Washington Post was running a story on that particular issue and like contacted me through Twitter, and they're like, hey, do you think this is offensive? And I was like, yeah, it's super offensive. And then in the paper, they said, Native American activist Tara Houska said, and I was like, I haven't even been to a protest. Like, I'm an activist just because I said something you don't like? You know what I mean? Because I said something you don't agree with, I'm an activist now? Like, I think that language and other words can have really negative connotations. Like, it undermines the validity of what you're saying because you're an activist, right? Like, I'm saying something something I believe to be true, but because I'm an activist, there's all these special interests, or there's this agenda behind it or something like that, and no, I'm just a person that has observed a lot of different things, and this is the conclusions I've reached. And I think that advocate is a little bit it's not quite so jaded as activist.
So Tara, I'm thankful I can learn from you and for your work. I'm wondering if you get any hope from the idea of the Green New Deal.
You know, I was just out in DC actually like last week working on the Green New Deal. I continue to work in those spaces and places because I do think that policy work is important. I think that it has the capability of reaching a large narrative, of reaching a large audience. So most people in the audience might have heard of the Green New Deal. That is progress, right? Like that we've even heard of what that is, that there's this idea that we're going to invest in green energy and that we're going to move away from fossil fuels. That said, the Green New Deal as it currently exists at a national level doesn't even say the word fossil fuels, right? It doesn't even say it. And when I was there last week, I'm sitting in this room of people who are talking about policy language, who are talking about potential implementation over the next 20 years. And as that's happening, I'm watching the Wet'suwet'en people being arrested and like taken out of their blockade from a pipeline going through their territory. And so to me, like, yes, I get hope that people are doing those things, that they are engaging in that way, that they are advocating in that way. But there is so much happening right now in this moment, and policy work is not catching up nearly fast enough. It's just not. You know, yes, I think people should get out and vote. Yes, I think that people should engage in whatever way they're comfortable, but there has to be an understanding that this is happening now, that we do not have time to only talk, that we do not have time to only share words with each other and ideas. You know, the Paris Climate Accord is an idea, a potential of an idea. We agree to maybe do this, but we're not actually going to bind ourselves to it. That's not going to solve climate crisis that's happening. That's not going to stop the rainforest from burning now. There has to be far more significant action for that. So I do get hope from the Green New Deal, but I guess I look at things very pragmatically of what's happening in real time.
First, I want to thank you for your existence and just your resistance in general. And I guess what I want to ask is, being a public speaker on these issues that are like law enforcement is really cracking down on, like how do you prepare yourself for that? Like, do you ever get nervous about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when you take a position that's disruptive of the status quo, you are automatically kind of putting yourself into a situation of risk. You have become a disruptor. You're not staying in line. You are living outside of the norms that we are expected to live within. I guess for me personally, I know the risks that I'm taking, and I know the risks that I engage in when I do all kinds of different actions and activities and speeches or whatever it happens to be. But you know, my feet are on the ground, and I'm holding the earth in my heart when I speak and when I do. And so that truth inside is what keeps me protected. I recognize that there are things that, you know, I was arrested in North Dakota for trespassing. The idea of that as an Indigenous person, being arrested for trespass is, I mean, that whole concept is crazy. You know what I mean? It's crazy to me. But I was asked to stand, and so I stood, you know, and I think there's a balance that happens between integrity and the risk, your personal risk, and we're all in a place of figuring out like what we're willing to risk, you know, what we're willing to do. And some of us might risk more, and some of us might risk less, and it's all important. But we have to do something, right? Like if we don't do anything and we're just paralyzed, it's going to continue. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess you can be real careful about your words if you want to be real careful about your words. I say what I believe to be true.
We have a gentleman over here who
Oh, that gentleman over there?
Yeah, this gentleman
Okay.
over here, he has a good question for you.
Bonjour. Thank you, Tara. Thank you for being here. You know, your message is very heartfelt. And, you know, for me and you, growing up as a brown child and stuff like that, and I've worked with a lot of students, I found that a lot of my students were disconnected from their culture. And yet they knew in their heart or in their minds that there was more out there. Can you remember back when you didn't quite understand what that was about being Native? And I'm talking thousands of students I've worked with in the last 20 years that came to my office and said that. There's more out there. How do we connect to being Native? Or because they had it inside of them, but they didn't know what it was. You know, and you spoke a little bit about the roads and the stuff that's within all of us Native Americans and all people. But, you know, speak a little bit maybe on that, you know, maybe we could help our students take a look at that.
Yeah, I think, you know, for me, it was, you know, very visual because my stepfather was blonde and my sister was blonde and my mom is Native, but, you know, my cousins were brown. The Houska family was, but at the same time, like, you know, I knew that there was this missing piece. And I actually kind of, you know, I was embarrassed about it for a long time growing up. You know, I hated the fact that I was like this brown I wanted to be a different person. I wanted it to be easier because it was hard. You know, it was hard being brown and in poverty. And it was embarrassing to me. You know, it was embarrassing to see our people in such rough situations, you know, in the falls, to see that. It was really, really hard. And so by the time I got to college, you know, I was so angry, you know, and I didn't even know why I was angry. I was just so angry. And I didn't know how to put words to it, right? And so then I was drinking my butt off, and I was like going down that road, and then something really horrible happened, and I was like, you know, this is awful. You know, this is an awful situation. And so I found my way back through the language program. I just signed up for a language class at the University of Minnesota and found my way to a teacher he was like, you should call me. You should come sweat with us. And he kept offering and he kept offering. And you know, at first I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, maybe I'll do that sometime. You know, maybe sometime I will, but I'm not going to do that. You know, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. But then I finally started going, you know, and then I started like building this, and then I started feeling like this calling that was inside, like it started to feel more solid, and I stopped feeling so angry all the time because I was connecting back to what was already inside of me. You know, it's a process. It's still a process, even now. You know, I go to ceremony pretty often now. You know, I go to lodge, I go to Sundance, I go to different ceremony that, you know, it does different things, right? It protection, healing, you know, these different things that we ask for and these different things that we're seeking. But I'm still just a work in progress, you know? And it's okay to be a work in progress. We all are. If an elder is telling you that they have the right way and they have all the knowledge, I don't know if I would, you know what I mean? I'm like, The elders that I listen to are the ones that say, you know, I only know a little, but this is what I know. They're the ones that remind you of, you know, I heard this teaching like 4 years ago. I've been thinking about it for 4 years. And I told him that actually last summer, and he was like, you've been thinking about that for 4 years? And I was like, yeah. He got up in the middle of a ceremony, and he stands up and he's like, I have to say something, you know? And he's like the elder in the room, the most elder of all the elders, right? Like the king elder or whatever. No, he's not the king elder. But he gets up, and so like everyone stops, right? Like they have to stop because he's going to speak. And he said, I want everyone in this room to stop what they're doing and to think about the fact that we are all just bugs. We're all just bugs. We're pitiful bugs. Those feathers that you're holding, that pipe that you have, at the end of the day, you are a pitiful bug, and you're asking for the help of something that's greater than yourself. No matter how many feathers you have, no matter if you have a whole headdress, you're still just pitiful. You're still just a bug. And so I've been thinking about that bug for like 4 years, right? Of just like that I'm just this pitiful little bug, and that we all are. But yeah, I think, it doesn't matter what stage you are in of disconnection. It's just trying to find that way and trying to solidify it that helps so much and calms and soothes that anger and that frustration that I think exists when you don't have those connections and you don't have those ties. It's there. It's there for all of us.
We might have time for one more question before we wrap it up. We have a comment. Does that count? All right. Since it's Babette, yeah.
Seeing you reminds me of a time we were together, because I know we don't know each other real well, but we've seen each other a lot. We were at a Stop Line 3 rally downtown, and we ran into something unexpected, where the Eagle staff was not being allowed to come into a certain place downtown. And man, we fought side by side. And I would look over at you, and you would look over at me, and I'm like, you should be honored, this Eagle staff's in here. And they had the policies out. There's nothing on there that says anything about sacred items. And we fought, and the woman holding the Eagle staff was not backing down. It was for missing and murdered Indigenous women. And we all didn't back down. They called the police. It did not matter. We're staying right here, Oma, right here. And we won. Hey. So I just want to say, that just reminds me to tell everybody, when you believe in something and you see something go wrong, stand up and don't back down, because we would not. And that Eagle staff attended that meeting that day, didn't it? So seeing you makes me have a good memory of that, and I think it's a good story that I'll always cherish, and other people should know it. So there it is, Miigwech.
All right. So this was more than I expected. Miigwech Tara, and miigwech for everybody that came and those ones that already left. And if you are wanting to hear more, I know that Tara has quite a few bits out there on social media, and you can find her TED Talk. Like, what?
That was weird. That was super weird.
And a lot of the issues that she spoke about, there's a lot of digging that can happen, and the more that we all dig for those answers, the more answers that we will bring forward and do what needs to be done in our communities. So before we end, if we could just give one more round of applause for Tara. I forgot to mention, Anishinaabe Student Council helped us bring this here as well. This is Biboon Fest here. Tomorrow at noon, they'll be here learning some things about hand games. So if you are a student on campus that's interested in that, we'll be here at noon tomorrow. Miigwech Be'ijayig, thank you for coming here, and peace.